the destruction of some of the graves in Jewish cemeteries is not going to be tolerated. Now is, I think, hopefully trying to convince people that he is fair, he is rational, and he is just. It's the tone that I think made the difference. There is not that much in the speech itself that changed what he has been saying for the last year or year and a half, other than the immigration issue, which I think we'll get to. And it was presidential.
There were so many that were comparing this to his inauguration speech. Some saying, I heard Joe Trippi just a few minutes ago, that why couldn't this have been his inauguration speech?
Well, I sort of disagree a little bit in that I thought the inauguration speech was a tough speech because it was his first speech to Washington where he said, look, what I said on the campaign trail, I meant, and I'm going to keep all of these promises. And that was a very important thing to do. But also, that speech last night, there was a lot of toughness in it. One of my favorite lines was where he said, my job is not to represent the world. What a sea change that is from Republicans who have believed in sort of remaking the world, and President Obama, who in 2009 said, one of my jobs, he went to Egypt in 2009 and said, one of my jobs as president is to correct the misinterpretations of Islam wherever they appear. This was a totally different.
And you wonder if he won over a few more people that have been skeptical of this president last night. Megyn, I want to get to this latest Snap poll asking the question, how did President Trump's speech make you feel more optimistic about the direction of the country is headed? 69% said it made them feel more optimistic, 28% more pessimistic. Megyn, you have not always supported Donald Trump through the campaign process. You did eventually come around. Did this further strengthen your support for the president?
I was so pleased last night. All the promises that were made yesterday by his staff, I think he more than lived up to. It was a lot less Steve Bannon, a lot more Ronald Reagan. Of course, this is the tone and attitude I would like to see going forward. Like the judge said, policy-wise, it wasn't terribly different than what he's saying on the campaign trail, but context does matter. And for me, it was reassurance that he does respect the traditions of Washington, D.C., of being president, which up until this point, I wasn't entirely sure he did. And I thought it was a home run all the way around.
So I want to pick your brain a little bit more, Charlie, because one of the things that I was watching for during the speech were those areas where he actually can get things done. Yeah. Because speeches are great, but it's the results that America really would be waiting for. I mean, that's why you vote a sea change like this, right? Sure. So you mentioned a couple of areas where he and establishment Republicans might not be yoked. I was thinking when he mentioned, things like Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, I'm looking for the poker face behind him with Speaker Paul Ryan and wondering what's he thinking, right? You know what I'm saying? Yeah. The paid maternity leave, what he's going to do for families, parents.
I felt like he actually last night completely stole the idea, the issue of health care from Democrats. And I felt like they realized it at the time because he portrayed Obamacare as being this disaster that Democrats had sort of lured so many poorer people into. And then he said, look, we're not going to leave those Americans who got suckered into Obamacare to sort of struggle on their own. We're going to help them out of it. And that's not a particularly conservative or a particularly Republican
But he's
sort of notion.
Obligating those Republicans then to walk out his vision. So again, I hear the pushback on Democrats. That's baked into the cake. That's politics. But I'm curious, how do you get things done? You've got to work within your own party, too.
It's going to be tough.
What did you see last night?
Well, where he laid out some of the principles that he wants to see in the Obamacare replacement, when he talked about health savings accounts and some of those other issues, whether that's enough to sort of fix everything that's wrong with Obamacare, I don't know.
All right, so there was obviously some standout moments in that speech last night, and here's what Donald Trump has tweeted, the only tweet he has sent out from his account today. Here's what he said. Thank you. 2 words, that's it, Judge.
Very classy.
I was going to mention that he hadn't tweeted in a while. And
it is.
I think that was something that it kind of teed up the speech itself, that he hadn't tweeted anything and everyone was kind of listening and wondering what was going on. But what I liked about the speech is that he spoke to everyone, and when he talked about paid leave and family leave, he spoke to the issues that Ivanka is going to be addressing.
And she was obviously present.
Yes, and the military and, immigrants and, possibly a compromise, as well as, the America First. And there was
education,
the civil rights issue of our time. That's amazing language. I think he co-opted a lot of this stuff from the Democrats.
And speaking of standout moments, and you mentioned the military, the obvious standout moment of when he honored the widow of the Navy SEAL.
I couldn't handle it. I started tearing up, and I have a cold, dark heart. And
that was lost in that.
I wanted it to stop. I was like, I'm getting emotional in my bedroom alone. I can't handle it. It was very powerful. I think it is the greatest moment of his administration so far. Granted, it's young. It's only 36 days old. Incredibly moving. You have to be a complete and total you-know-what if you weren't moved by that moment. And I think he's really, I mean, I'm so pleasantly surprised in so many ways. Whether or not the base like this speech, I don't know. I didn't like his inauguration speech. I think when you're talking about American carnage and some of the darker tones, it's much more nationalistic than I am. But I thought it was a great, I mean, the proof is in the pudding. Look at the poll you showed. Almost 70% of the American public responded optimistically to it.
I thought that moment with the Navy SEAL's wife, Corinne, transcended everything else that had gone on in the room. I mean, it was above politics. It was just above every moment. It was a heart-yoking moment. And I think it will be talked about for years to come.
And, you know,
it really stood out.
Isn't it refreshing that we are now recognizing the people in the military, the widows who've lost their loved ones, and now there's an American pride and in the military, and in spite of some of the language, now Donald, the president, can actually use new national pride and talk about that without people getting hysterical. It's tone, it's delivery.
Yeah, effective. All right, Charlie Hurt, thank you for being here. Judge, good to see you. All right, let's move on. As we just mentioned, one of the most memorable moments from last night was when President Trump paid tribute to the widow of a Navy SEAL killed in a raid last month. She got a standing ovation that lasted more than 2 minutes, but some liberals are not happy with it. And Mr. Trump making an appeal for unity and bipartisanship, with Democrats remain skeptical whether they'll ever be able to actually work together.
Democrats and Republicans should get together and unite for the good of our country and for the good of the American people.
Dow surging today after President Trump's big speech last night. Look at the optimism in the U.S. stock market. That's a 306-point jump. It's way above 21,000 now. We're now looking at 21,119. By the way, the new Treasury Secretary Mnuchin just did an interview with our own Neil Cavuto saying that tax reform could come by August. Right after that, the stock market hit the highs of the session. We're watching it for you.
All right. My 401k is doing a cartwheel. President Trump reached across the political aisle in his speech to Congress last night and called for unity and bipartisanship.
I am here tonight to deliver a message of unity and strength, and it is a message deeply delivered from my heart. Why not join forces and finally get the job done and get it done right? Democrats and Republicans should get together and unite for the good of our country and for the good of the American people. We must build bridges of cooperation and trust, not drive the wedge of disunity. True love for our people requires us to find common ground, to advance the common good, and to cooperate on behalf of every American child who deserves a much brighter future. The time for small thinking is over. The time for trivial fights is behind us.
But some Democrats were simply not having it. A group of women in the caucus wore white in solidarity with women's suffrage and to protest the president. Others boycotted that aisle handshake that's so traditional as he enters the hall. And Democrats, with muted enthusiasm, clapped and gave stand ovations far less often than their Republican counterparts. Here's reaction from Democrats Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi just this morning.
He's given a whole lot of speeches, and we've seen that the speeches and the reality don't match. I'll say yes when he comes up with something that is really helps working people and says, I want to work with Democrats. Here's my proposal. So in an What's yours?
It's clearly a bait and switch speech, and the president talks a good talk. All we have is rhetoric. We don't have any reality in terms of any legislation where we can work together. We will try to do that. We haven't seen any place to work together.
Judge, it seemed that the president was throwing down the gauntlet of love. He said true love for our people requires us to find common ground. Boy, who wouldn't ascribe to that?
Some Democrats, clearly. And what the president did was he was speaking to the American people when he said, look, the time for all of these trivial fights is over. Basically saying, you guys lost, get over it. And we work for the American people. And this speech, I think, will convince the American people that he's got an agenda that they have. And when you see the stock market, as Sandra just talked about, and jobs, I mean, for Nancy Pelosi to say that they're separate from reality, when the president tried to get jobs from Carrier before he was even in the White House.
Well, and you see some members saying from inside the Democratic Party, Charlie, that that was presidential last night. They have a problem on their hands with the Democrats because they're struggling right now. And if all their opposition is to the guy who just stood up to be presidential, that gets complicated for them.
Oh, they have severe problems, not the least of which is the fact that Nancy Pelosi is still the House Minority Leader, which just boggles my mind.
That's another problem.
Yeah. But you know, the thing that I think is sort of interesting is when you, and it may have been something about the setting sort of brings that out and makes people sort of look at him anew. But a lot of those sort of bipartisan, the reaching across the aisle, has been stuff that he, even during the campaign, he said it peppered with a lot of other stuff, a lot of more, cantankerous stuff. But he has said all of those things before. And I think that it's the first time, it's not the first time he's reached across the aisle, but I think maybe it's the first time he's ever broken through across the aisle.
Like if you, real quickly, we just want to get to this because I want to show everybody this in case they missed it. So there were no audible sounds. That's per the rules that Democrats could make. But did you see this?
Tonight, I am also calling on this Congress to repeal and replace Obamacare.
Hear some audibles, though. I think there were some people who were,
and they all look like they're sucking on lemons.
Can we talk about the women wearing all white?
Let's talk about suffrage. So is that because their female candidate and Hillary Clinton didn't make it through and they didn't get to vote for a woman?
I'm not saying this to be trite, and I'm not saying this.
Yeah, they got to vote for her.
She just couldn't get enough of them.
Go ahead, Megyn.
I'm not saying this to be cute or to be trite. I legitimately don't understand what they want with the women's suffrage movement, because I know that the feminist movement is all tied up with being pro-choice and abortion and Cecil Richards and Planned Parenthood. So if that's what you're talking about, you're not representing 50% of women in America. I don't understand what rights I don't have as a woman other than you're angry that a woman didn't become president. It has nothing to do with gender. It has to do with you putting up a historically horrible candidate. And I'm offended by this. I'm offended that you think that you represent all women in the country. You do not at all. I assure you that if you're going on TV talking about how the government should pay for birth control and we should fund Planned Parenthood, there's 50% of the American women are out.
Kind of then from what you're saying, Megyn, and
it angers me.
Maybe you can comment on this. Does this fit in that same box that the Women's March went in? Because we were all kind of struggling to find out, well, what is the unified message?
I was at that march and I kept saying, what are you complaining about? What don't you have? And these women, and by the way, it's reminiscent of the 1900s when the women suffragettes wore white because they wanted
we get the history. We know the history.
Okay, but the problem right now is that they are so angry that they lost that they're saying you're going to lose more votes. Or you're going to lose more rights. And yet every time the president talked about, promising to save jobs, putting America first, women entrepreneurs, these women were thumbs down.
Yeah.
They're anti-American, anti-woman, anti-family leave.
Government-funded parenthood leave from the government, which I'm against, and I don't understand at this point, when Donald Trump may give you more than Hillary Clinton did, why you're still angry with the idea that these women represent all women in America is absolute.
I go back to Charlie's comment. It looked like they were all sucking on lemons during the speech. But Nancy Pelosi her body language never looked like she walked into that room with an open mind.
Of course
like she was going to listen and digest this speech any differently than her preconceived notions of what he was going to say. But her big thing going into this, she had released a statement, there's no jobs bill. That's her new thing. But of course, the White House and Donald Trump's response to that is, that's not how we're creating jobs. We're rolling back regulations and we're implementing tax reform. That's how you create jobs. Government doesn't create jobs. But Nancy Pelosi is going to stick to that point, and obviously she wasn't going to change her mind after the speech.
She was looking like she was waiting to get a root canal the entire
In all
night.
fairness, I do want to just say that when you look at these speeches traditionally, and usually we only see this at the State of the Union, so this was early earlier than that. This was just a joint session conversation that the president had last night, or speech. That it's never warm and fuzzy, you know, for whichever party is out of power. So just on balance, it's never like that. But this was exceptional in the fact that they were dressed in one color and thumbing the president.
And you know,
they don't speak for all women.
They don't speak for all women, but when you think about it, you've got the president of the United States. He's giving this optimistic, empowering speech, and he's looking at all of these women in white who are there to say naysay anything that he says with thumbs down, and yet he was able to keep delivering and ignoring that negativity in the room.
It's about abortion, and they should be intellectually honest with their statements and what they claim they're representing.
Just ignore them. I think the American people are ignoring them, so not to worry.
Then came the Democratic rebuttal delivered by former Kentucky Governor Steve Beshear from a diner in Middle America.
As a candidate, you promised to be a champion for families struggling to make ends meet. And I hope you live up to that promise. But one of your very first executive orders makes it harder for those families to even afford a mortgage. And even more troubling, you and your Republican allies in Congress seem determined to rip affordable health insurance away from millions of Americans who most need it. Our political system is broken. It's broken because too many of our leaders think it's all about them.
So that response getting panned by both the right and the left. Watch, it's hard to get through.
The Democratic Party is at its lowest point of power in this country since the 1920s. And the Democratic response was made by a 72-year-old retired two-term governor from Kentucky, not by Kamala Harris, not by Kristen Gillibrand, not by the Castro brothers, not by anyone who has a future in the actual Democratic Party. Just amazing ineptitude for a party out of power like the Democrats are.
The response is always trouble. It's always bad. Whenever you try to do something stunty and small like this, I think it ends up looking stunty and small.
Oh man, Judge, we got Rachel Maddow off the bandwagon. It must be pretty bad.
That is amazing with Rachel Maddow, and I think Van Jones as well. Look, this speech was all about what we needed to hear, what we want. We want security, and we want jobs, and we want to make sure that we have health care. But the man who delivered it in a way that made sense. That's all.
Well, you mentioned Van Jones. I mean, he was one of the people who said that the president looked presidential, and he said he became a president last night. And again, I think that's extremely complicated for Democrats. But when you kind of look at this total picture, though, where are we today? Because that's really what matters, Charlie. I mean, going forward.
The most astonishing thing to me about that is that they couldn't find an actual elected Democrat to deliver the response.
Do they have no future? That's my question. Where's their future?
Did you hear what he said? You know, a few lines into the thing, he called himself a Republican first, and then he started talking about fiscal responsibility and all these things you would never hear Chuck Schumer or Nancy Pelosi talk about.
Yeah, but Chris, what doesn't make sense to me is there had to be loads of Democrats who wanted to come out and criticize him. So why him?
When you're talking about they do have talent, which we talk about on the couch. Heidi Heitkamp, who is a Democrat who won in a red state, Representative Tim Ryan. Well, they're people, Democrats who have won in overwhelmingly red states that Trump won. Why aren't you putting people like that out? It's like they're like, he has a Southern accent. Great, we'll put him on TV. It was so thirsty, so contrived.
But he also can't jeopardize. He doesn't threaten anybody inside the party. Remember, they just had a race for DNC with 10 candidates. They couldn't put up that many people to take on Hillary before the primaries were over. I mean, this.
I was absolutely flabbergasted. It was like something out of South Park. It was so bad, and they've had really bad responses.
I mean, he drew the short straw.
They have people. They have people they can use, and you're going to have this retired man.
Why? That's what I don't understand.
Because he doesn't threaten anybody.
And also because they don't want to have the hard discussion about, well, what is our party about? And you're right. It's about a couple of very specific issues that they, you know, special interest issues, and it's not about a large cohesive sort of vision. And that's what, and then whereas with Donald Trump last night we saw his party is about a very large cohesive vision.
Sandra,
if he couldn't win over Rachel Maddow, I don't know that he was effective in winning over anybody who's currently skeptical of the president.
Pretty bleak if you can't win her over. All right, before his speech, President Trump indicated he could shift his immigration stance, but when he got to the podium, he doubled down on his hardline stance. Is the White House sending mixed messages?
and citizens of America. Tonight, as we mark.
So what do you do one day after your big speech? Well, President Trump is meeting with Republican leaders at the White House amid growing questions over his stance on immigration. Yesterday, the president reportedly said he was considering a path to citizenship for some illegal immigrants and that he was open to compromise. But in his address to Congress, he stuck with more of a hard line, doubling down on his call to boost deportations and enforce the law. Here's some watch.
By finally enforcing our immigration laws, we will raise wages, help the unemployed, save billions and billions of dollars, and make our communities safer for everyone. We want all Americans to succeed, but that can't happen in an environment of lawless chaos. We must restore integrity and the rule of law at our borders. And we must support the victims of crime. I have ordered the Department of Homeland Security to create an office to serve American victims. The office is called VOICE, Victims of Immigration Crime Engagement. We are providing a voice to those who have been ignored by our media and silenced by special interests. Joining us
All right, so we're having a little bit of discussion on the couch even while that was rolling, and you caught some wording that stood out to you that needed to be changed by the president. What was it?
Yeah, well, anytime you interchange the immigration with illegal aliens, it's a real problem because it's sort of, immigration, we're a country of immigrants. It's a good thing. It's the illegal part that is the problem. And you know who also doesn't like illegal aliens coming into the country and going around the line? Legal immigrants who've done it correctly. Right. And I loved one of the things that I can't remember who it was that said this, made the point that even people who are here illegally, there's still a pathway to citizenship. Go get in line
military.
And do it, or
the military, right?
And do it legally.
So that was a word you thought he needed to slip in there. That policy was per illegal immigration.
Yeah, but everybody in politics it seems to make that mistake, and I wish they wouldn't.
Talk to me about how what he has said previously and what was said tonight was different, because it sounded consistent, but the legality of what really can be done, what do you think?
We still heard the concept that, look, we can't have illegal immigrants here who are committing crimes. We can't have an environment of chaos. We have to have law and order. But what he said that was very different was there's a pathway for the dreamers, and recognizing that immigration is probably going to be one of his signature issues. He has got to compromise.
But he said that,
and it was a start.
But he said that to reporters before the speech, but then didn't talk about it in the speech. So that's the mixed messaging that we're talking about. So could he actually get away with that sort of compromise?
Yeah, I think that he can. I think he absolutely can.
And will Democrats come on board with that? I mean, I see some jumping off points for Democrats to come on board last night if they take off their white dresses and turn their thumbs upside down.
Oh, boy. Yeah, no way. But he was inviting that, and that's what he was saying, but it's got to be compromise. He even said that when he was talking about immigration.
So before we get to this next part, Megyn, I want everybody to hear this. It's merit-based immigration policy. Let's talk about this, but let's watch.
Switching away from this current system of lower-skilled immigration and instead adopting a merit-based system, we will have so many more benefits. It will save countless dollars, raise workers' wages, and help struggling families, including immigrant families, enter the middle class.
I thought that was new language from the president last night.
Listen, I think this is very politically tricky for him because he did run and win being a hardline immigration person. I mean, he came down on the escalator in Trump Tower. I mean, the most aggressive rhetoric we have ever heard out of a mainstream political candidate. I think if he hedges a little bit on the right, he's going to lose his base, talking about comprehensive immigration. I think if Democrats will never be pleased unless you just give every illegal immigrant citizenship immediately, I think it's very politically tricky for him.
Judge, you're shaking your your head.
But I think that the American people are tired of this issue, from Bush to Obama. They are saying it's time to put this issue away. We've got to get rid of the worst of the worst, and let's just deal with the fact that the dreamers who were brought here as little kids, who didn't do anything, or were educated in our schools, are allowed to stay here. That's the compromise. It's got to work. He's not going to lose his base on that.
Do you think conservative talk radio people like Ann Coulter, people like Laura Ingraham, who this is their cornerstone issue that they're aggressive on, they're going to like that?
They're not going to like it at all, but they also understand how the sausage is made. Right. It's not pretty.
I am a lot more in the middle on this, so I'm happy if he comes to reason. I just think there's going to be some unhappy people in talk radio.
The big problem with this debate has always been in 1986 when Ronald Reagan approved the granting of 3 million illegals amnesty. The deal was they would get amnesty and then we would fix the problem.
Yeah.
They did the fun part, as politicians like to do. They didn't do the hard part.
Right.
And so today, the argument that so many of these hardliner Republicans, their argument is, let's fix the problem, the future problem, so we don't have to deal with it again, and then deal with the other part of it.
There's a law. Just follow it.
Yeah, but also to prevent a new flow of illegals coming into the country.
There are actually many laws.
Yeah,
it's not just one.
And so the deal is, and I've always felt like Democrats, if they actually cared about those people as much as they care about the political issue itself, they would agree to fixing the problem so we don't have it in the future, and then deal with what you do with the people.
By the way, before we go to break, see that little picture in the bottom of your screen? The Dow up 317 points, highs of the session. Big gains after that speech last night. Well, for the first time, President Trump saying something that's never been said in a speech to Congress before, and he did it against the reported advice of his new national security advisor. What it is and the impact it could have. Next.
New information.